For Judge Kavanaugh, and I am hopeful. I think he understands that the role of the Supreme Court justice is not to try to rewrite the Constitution every other Thursday to advance a political agenda. It's to be an umpire, to say what the law is and not what the law ought to be. And that's what I'm going to celebrate today.
Why do you think Judge Gorsuch went through so easily and this one did not?
I don't think it had anything to do with Justice Gorsuch versus soon-to-be Justice Kavanaugh.
Was it numbers?
I think it was the fact that Justice Kennedy was considered to be a swing vote. I think that the opposition to Judge Kavanaugh looked at his record, saw that it was a distinguished one, so they decided that the only way to take him down is through character assassination. And I really regret that, but that's what happened. That's why I said yesterday, and I'll say again today, there are no winners. I'll bet you if you talk to Judge Kavanaugh or Dr. Ford tonight, neither one of them think they won.
Well, could you imagine if he was defeated based on words and accusation from 36 years ago?
Well, one other positive, though, this in addition to being proud that we're going to confirm Judge Kavanaugh, I'm proud that we reaffirmed the importance of due process in our society. That doesn't mean that we don't have a problem with sexual violence in America. We clearly do. But and I'll say it again. This is no country for creepy old men or middle-aged men or young men. But it's not a country at all without due process. And you have to treat both the accused and the accuser, both of them, with respect and fairness and due process. That's the kind of country I want to live in.
Senator Kennedy, it's Dana Perino. I wanted to ask you about, last Sunday night you appeared on 60 Minutes, and this was right after Senator Jeff Flake on a Friday, just a week ago yesterday, asked for that supplemental FBI investigation. Some Republicans were kind of frustrated about that and the delay, but looking back in hindsight, do you think that actually was something that actually helped a lot of senators be able to get to yes, such as a Susan Collins?
Yes, it clearly helped. And Senator Flake and Senator Collins and Senator Murkowski, at the time, it was clear to me that they probably weren't going to vote for confirmation without the additional FBI investigation. I didn't think it was necessary from a substance point of view because I felt like our investigators at the Judiciary Committee had done a great job. And indeed, the FBI report just for the most part, reaffirmed what our judiciary investigators found. But it was important that Senator Flake and Senator Collins and Senator Murkowski, and in hindsight, I'm glad we did it.
It doesn't appear that
American people.
If you listen to her speech from yesterday, Senator, it doesn't appear that Senator Collins needed that seventh FBI investigation.
Oh,
I think the way she laid out the case.
I think she did. I spent a lot of time down in our secure quarters reading the FBI background investigation, and I saw Senator Collins every time I was there. She spent a lot of time going over it. Susan does her homework.
Yeah, that wasn't my suggestion. My suggestion was that the argument that she was making public yesterday seemed like she was a yes for a long time.
Maybe. I mean, I couldn't read Susan. Susan is... and it's not my place to read her. Her vote is her own. But my experience with Senator Collins is she's extremely conscientious, and she always looks at both sides, and she does almost an exhaustive investigation on an issue. And my impression was, I don't know what was in her mind or in her heart, but my impression was that she was undecided.
Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. John Kennedy, Senator from Louisiana. Thank you.
All right, it's just a little over an hour from now. The Senate will vote on the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. This coming after several fence-sitters swung in the judge's direction. Our live coverage continues with Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. He will speak with Chris Wallace and Shannon Bream at 3 p.m. Eastern right here on the Fox News Channel.
The most important thing is to think about what it says about the background of Judge Kavanaugh, a person who has been very well educated, very well devoted to public service, but more importantly, 12 years on the second most important court in our land.
That's Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley earlier today, as we are getting closer to the final vote on the confirmation of Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court. This is expected to take place exactly 1 hour from now. The Senate expected to vote in favor of Kavanaugh after a contentious and highly emotional confirmation battle. Joining me now, Tennessee Senator Bob Corker. Sir, this might be one of the most important votes that you take as a senator, but it also could be one of the last ones that you take as you are retiring. And I wonder what your thoughts are today as you have a historic day, over a weekend, right up to the deadline with all of the midterms looming and then the 2020 election beyond it. I mean, this is some pretty high stakes.
Well, Dan, it is, and I'm very confident in my vote. I'm looking forward to it. I talked to Judge Kavanaugh this morning and thanked him for his willingness to serve the country in this manner and to go through all this, and talked to Don McGahn, who's, I think, going to leave the White House whenever he leaves with a tremendous legacy for our country. Talked to Susan Collins yesterday and thanked her for a speech that to me was historic and not only reflected well on all Republicans, but I think the Senate as a whole. And so, yes, it's a big day. It's a great day for our nation. And I look forward to the vote at 3:30 or 4, whenever it takes place.
I wonder what you think about the partnership between President Trump and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell when it comes to judges. They've been working in concert together. They have a record number of judges confirmed already. This would make the second Supreme Court justice. And how have you seen that play out over the past couple of years?
Well, Senator McConnell makes no bones about the fact that this will be, in some ways, transformative. This is going to be, as you know, better than most. I mean, this is going to impact our country for more than a generation. We're still going to confirm more judges after this throughout the duration of this year. Still have a lot of work to do in that regard. But look, this is a legacy that the president and our majority leader can be very proud of, and they've worked very well together. And let's face it, Mitch has been dogged in his approach. He just keeps pressing on, doesn't get distracted, and he's done an outstanding job with this. He really has.
Senator, I was picking up on a couple of things you said this past week, but before I get there, what was Brett Kavanaugh's state of mind this morning when you spoke with him?
You know, he was very upbeat. He was very upbeat. I can't imagine the life that he has lived over the last couple of weeks, and just the horror of being accused of something like this, coming before the tenor that he's had to take, if you will, from on the other side of the aisle in both of the hearings. But it's been very difficult, very upbeat. Bill, I told him I was very envious. I've lived a pretty full life and met many people in my life, but I think it spoke volumes about who he is to see how many friends, close friends that he has who've come out on his behalf, people that have known him all of his life. And I told him, obviously, in a somewhat joking way, I was envious of him and having so many close friends who supported and loved him the way they do.
Now, did he express what he shared in the Wall Street Journal piece the other night about being too emotional at a point during that hearing 10 days ago?
No, I read that, obviously. But I think at this point, he knows what the outcome is going to be, and I think he's focused on the future and committed, after all that's happened, to being the very best Supreme Court justice that he can possibly be. And I think he's going to double down on that. And I think his colleagues will embrace him well when he gets there, just because of the kind of person that he is.
Did you get a chance to speak to his wife, Ashley, or find out about how
I did not.
She and his daughters are doing?
I did not, but I certainly asked him about that and shared my empathy for all that they have dealt with.
Sir, as you prepare to retire from the Congress and you look at how important the Supreme Court nominations have become for both Republicans and Democrats, for all Americans, what do you think about Congress's role here and the need to sort of reassert itself as a legislative body, passing laws and not relying on the court to make law?
Well, Dana, you're hitting the nail on the head as to why there's so many protests and why this ends up being such an emotional battle, because we are not doing our job. So many of the things that the Supreme Court has to resolve are things that we should be passing legislation with. And no matter how you may feel about the recent tariff issues, My concern was using the 232 tariff issue, which really is Congress's role, the Section 232 of the 74 Trade Act. Again, it's just a continual situation of Congress, not really stepping up or giving away some of its responsibilities. So you're exactly right. I mean, if Congress would resolve these big issues for our nation as Congress is supposed to do, these Supreme Court nominations and battles would not be emotional at all.
Thank you, sir.
Senator, we're going to move to another guest, but I just want to quote you from Tuesday night, because this is where you came out publicly and said you were a yes, essentially. Those who were sympathetic to Dr. Ford could not recall or provide any evidence to support her story. Did you make that argument to other senators who might have been on the fence or not?
I did. We had some discussions down in the SCIF as we were all reading this. And then let me just say one other thing, Bill. Women have suffered injustices for decades. We all know that. And our heart goes out to them for that. But to project those injustices that have happened to them onto an individual like Judge Kavanaugh that have absolutely nothing to do with that is also an injustice. And I really do think that the other side of the aisle, unfortunately, just over-leveraged this. They overreached, and I think the American people have seen that. And again, I look forward to today. As Dana was alluding to, these are emotional. Congress should step up and pass laws itself. Hopefully that will happen, but it's been the greatest privilege of my life, regardless of how we function, to serve in this body. And I thank you and others for how they've treated me. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Bob Corker, the Republican from Tennessee. Thank you for being here with us today. Back live on the floor now, the Senate. Give you an idea about what's happening down there. We think, Dana, we're about an hour away.
Yeah,
less than that. Greg Nunziata is a former chief nominations counsel of the Senate Judiciary Committee. He was involved in at least 2 nomination processes. And Greg, welcome back here. Senator Cornyn there on the floor, the Republican from Texas. What do you think about the point that Bob Corker was making there at the end about Democrats overplaying their hand, Greg?
No, I think that's exactly right in a lot of ways. I mean, they clearly were going to be against whoever the president nominated. They said as much. They tried to stop the hearings from even starting. Once these allegations surfaced, which they had hid and mishandled, they immediately convicted Judge Kavanaugh based on no evidence, threw the presumption of innocence out the window. And I think all that behavior really drew strong reactions and repelled Senator Collins, Senator Graham, and other folks who've been kind of moderates on judicial confirmation issues. It's also really galvanized American voters, Republican voters in particular. I've never seen the Republicans so united and so energized over the last several years. So there are obviously bigger issues at stake, individual lives and the Supreme Court, but the impact on the election, I think, will be felt.
Greg, it's Dana. I wanted to ask you about some unanswered questions, or basically some things that people still think are a mystery, like who leaked Dr. Ford's letter? Where were the therapist notes? All of these things that, the left thinks that the FBI investigation was incomplete, but the right thinks that the committee still has some work to do. Do you think that the committee will endeavor to try to get answers to those things, or let it go and try to move forward?
I think a lot of people would like to close the door on the ugliness of the last few weeks. I don't think they're going to be able to. These are really big questions. I mean, the way these allegations came into at least Senator Feinstein's office, and that they weren't followed up upon, they weren't put through the normal procedures of the Judiciary Committee, and then came out in what seemed like a coordinated political hit, just totally blows up the traditions of the committee. And, this isn't just, they don't just do this for Supreme Court nominations. That committee processes hundreds of nominations to all sorts of judgeships and other important positions. That process has to work. And if it didn't work here, we need to know why and how things went wrong, and if it could be improved in the future.
That's Dick Durbin from Illinois now, the Democrat there on Judiciary Committee as well. Greg, when you think about all the arguments that have been made about Brett Kavanaugh's testimony and the assertive way that he addressed the senators, well, how do you address temperament? How do you judge a judge's temperament?
Well, I think it's look. I've worked on the confirmation process of dozens and dozens of judges. I know lots of judges personally. Some of them are moody, some are prickly, some get angry in traffic. That's all okay. It has nothing to do with judicial temperament. Judicial temperament is how you comport yourself as a judge. And Judge Kavanaugh has a tremendous reputation for an exceedingly professional judicial temperament in this town. In that hearing room last week, he wasn't functioning as a judge. He was functioning effectively as a defendant in a show trial. I think it was entirely just and appropriate for him to get angry and for him to push back a little bit. In fact, I think at the end of the day, him being real and not being scripted and working off talking points, I think that turned his confirmation around.
Greg, thank you. Greg Nunziata, there from Washington, D.C. Nice to see you,
Good to
Greg.
have him, right? Like a good guest who knows what he's talking about. He's been there. All right, as the Senate prepares for its final vote, we're keeping an eye right there on the Senate floor and protests also on Capitol Hill. We'll have more analysis with Karl Rove up ahead.
Donald Trump to be civilly or criminally charged or investigated or during his time in office. That's not what Kavanaugh said at all. As Andy McCarthy pointed out earlier, he once made a speech in which he said the investigations are criminal and civil investigations are a huge drain of time on a president, but it was up to Congress to decide whether or not a president could be charged, investigated, charged with a crime while he was in office. That was up to Congress, he said, not the courts deliberately, and yet Markey goes out and makes that accusation. Senator Leahy goes out there and once again calls Brett a liar for having not told the truth about being involved in the nomination of Bill Pryor to the Atlanta Circuit Court, and saying that he lied to the committee. I know that's absolutely untrue. I'm the guy who was pushing for Bill Pryor to be put on the 11th Circuit, and Ben Powell was the White House counsel who worked on that, not Brett. And yet, once again, Leahy goes down and on the floor of the United States Senate calls Brett a liar on that subject and several others, when he is absolutely, totally wrong. It's amazing to me that they are so sloppy and so callous in their comments.
Ed Markey's the one at the rally outside.
Right, so he
had a picture of there.
Right, so he took exactly what he said on the Senate floor, and then he took it out to the protesters out there as well. Karl, let me ask you, just like looking ahead to the next several hours. President Trump's at the White House. He's going to be leaving for Kansas in just a little bit to go to a rally there. He leaves today with a second Supreme Court confirmation. That's a significant accomplishment, another promise kept. Tell me about the president's standing now going into the midterms in 2020.
Well, it'll be strong. It'll be even stronger. It will be better than it was several weeks ago when he looked like he was going to be defeated on this. Success begets success. It's why we've seen in the last couple of weeks a modest increase in the president's polls. The higher he gets on the favorable and unfavorable, the better for Republicans in the midterm elections, and the better for the president in whatever next policy battle he intends to engage on. So this has been very valuable for the president. He's had terrific assistance in the Senate. He's been aided, ironically, by events that were outside of his control. Nobody inside the White House, nobody in the Senate Republican leadership was enthusiastic about an additional FBI investigation, but it now turns out that made it comfortable for Jeff Flake to vote for Brett Kavanaugh, and it made Susan Collins able to vote for Brett Kavanaugh. And interestingly enough, as it was seen in the Harvard-Harris poll, it now it lays the groundwork for as much as 60% of the American people to believe that Kavanaugh should be confirmed, because the additional investigation found no corroborating evidence for the charges made against him.
Conversely, do you think Joe Manchin survives in November after his yes vote in a state where Trump won by 42 points 2 years ago?
Yeah, I do. I think it gives him a very high-profile action to point to say, when I think the president is right, I'm going to work with him, even when it makes me unpopular in my party. And I was the only Democrat to do so because I thought it was the right thing to do. And it's a powerful argument to be made coming down the stretch. On the other hand, Claire McCaskill in Missouri, and Heidi Heitkamp in North Dakota, and John Tester in Montana, and Joe Donnelly in Indiana are in graver difficulty today because of this.
All right, Karl Rove, we always appreciate having you. Stick around.
Thanks for
after a
having me on.
months-long bruising battle over Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh, senators preparing to vote on his confirmation just about 40 minutes from now. We're going to go live to protests on Capitol Hill just ahead. It's live from outside the Supreme Court with more. Leland.
No, afternoon, Dana. It's hard to tell exactly who is in this group. You've got some diehard protesters. You have some of the Black Lives Matter protesters. And then you also have some of the D.C. brunch crowd that came over and said, hey, we're just looking around and seeing what's going on, and joined this group that is now sort of largely standing around here on the steps of the Supreme Court. You got a few different signs out here. We will not go back. We will not forget. See you in November. Those are the signs we can show you. A number of the signs we can't show you were up on the Capitol steps earlier when the diehard protesters all got arrested. The Capitol Police tried to pull everybody off, gave them the option you can either leave or get arrested. A lot of folks chose to be arrested to raucous cheers from the crowds. Not really massive crowds that came out of here. A lot of people with their dogs, a lot of people with their kids. The one rallying cry we continue to hear out here, Dana, from this crowd, it really feels like they pretty much lost the battle on Kavanaugh. They're resigned to that. They say the bigger war is about November, and most of the speeches now this afternoon are going from being anti-Kavanaugh to being rallying cries for the November midterms.
All right, Leland, we'll keep an eye on that. Thank you for being there for us. It looks like that is kind of petering out a little bit.
Back here in studio, Andy McCarthy, just a closing thought here. We've been talking for hours now, Andy. What do you think about what's transpired since 12 noon Eastern time?
You know, I'm very glad that we've finally gotten to the finish line. I happen to think that Brett Kavanaugh will be a model justice. I think he'll be a credit to the Supreme Court. Whether I'm right or I'm wrong about that, time will tell. But what gives me a feeling of sadness as we close instead of joy is that it seems to me the American tradition is supposed to be we have these knockdown, drag-out fights, and then we arrive at a decision and we rally around and we come together. And as we've heard snatches of some of the speeches in the Senate, and Karl Rove summarized a couple of them, I don't see what the point is at this point of tearing down the institution. And that, I think, is exactly what is happening in speeches which are now taking shots at Kavanaugh at a point where it's already clear he's going to be on the court. It's already clear that we've had this battle and it's time to be moving on. I think if you really care about the Supreme Court as an institution, I do not see the sense of tearing down. I haven't seen the sense of tearing down this good man for 3 weeks. But I particularly don't see it right this minute.
Thank you, Andrew McCarthy, here in the studio. On the floor of the Senate is Chuck Grassley, the senator from Iowa, heads up the Judiciary Committee. He has his turn at the microphone now as our special coverage of the final Senate confirmation vote on Judge Brett Kavanaugh gets closer and closer to the moment. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell will join Chris Wallace and Shannon Bream in about 6 minutes from now. Let's get a quick commercial break here. We will see Chuck Schumer in about 20 minutes as well. Time out here as our coverage continues right after this.